Hello, and welcome to the Joyful Rebels podcast, where rebellion meets wellness. We've got Claire and Donna Thomas here, your mother-daughter duo, and we are here to bring you our insight, some science, and maybe some laughs in our shared pursuit of finding some more peace, joy, and balance in both our physical and mental health. Thank you so much for listening, for joining us today. We're going to share some practical tips to empower you on your journey to living your best life. We're continuing on again with this new format, Ask the Joyful Rebels, because we are enjoying it. You ask, we answer. Today's question is a fun one. How are you, Mom, being a joyful rebel in this season? And we can break it down. How are you being a joyful rebel in your behavior, in your thoughts towards yourself, and in relationships? So all those different facets. How are you showing up as a joyful rebel in this season?
Hmm. I love that because I don't want the name or the idea of being a joyful rebel to get lost. And we're familiar with it. And if you're just joining us and you're like, I don't really know what that means, that, it really is how I look at it is this in a really joyful, happy way, just kind of going against the stream on
Mm-hmm.
many things related to fitness, that intersection of fitness and well-being and how they're intertwined. And as women, I think we get some interesting messages and we just have some potentially different roles in life. And so to make it so it feels good and lands in our heart in a healthy way in this dynamic world that we live in, that it requires to go against the norm. I do believe that. And it continues to show up. So I'm glad that as we get various iterations of that question for future topics for the podcast, clearly we jumped on this one because we're in a season. You're in a season, right, Claire? You got things going on. Again, season, whether it means an actual season or just a chunk of your life where you're feeling in a certain way. I also like that there are ways to show up. So hopefully you'll see yourself and identify in some of the ways that this can show up. Because I don't want to miss any opportunities. I want to be able to feel as good as I can and have good conversations and to put it into practice. But I don't know, sometimes I get complacent. Anybody else feel
Mm.
that way? Or I just kind of do what I do and I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, and I'm not saying you have to have the pedal down where you're just always just striving so hard, but I think with a little bit of awareness that we can keep these three things on our radar. And this is how it's showing up for me in this season of my life right now. The first one was in my behavior. So in my behavior, which is something that externally people can
Mm.
see, being a joyful rebel for me, this is probably no surprise to anybody, but it really is the powerlifting. It's the powerlifting, and especially here's where it's gotten even more defined for me recently, just within the last probably 6 weeks, is that my heart breaks for women over 60. Like Claire, I learned so much from you, and I have appreciated having this dual generation, these conversations. But I find that when I'm peer to peer with people, that I'm not finding too many that are doing this type of heavy lifting. And so I want to make sure that people can see that. And so that's a double-edged sword for me. So when I post things on my story, which I've said it before on the podcast that I usually do my last set, so I want to see where my form breaks down so I could learn from it. But that opens me up for comments. Sometimes I get criticisms. I do. And that's interesting for me to feel those. But what I really am trying to do more consistently now is put the hashtag this is 62. Because I want somebody to see that and go, wait a minute, really? Because sometimes I just need to see an example. I
Mm.
need to see an example of what it can look like. That doesn't mean it has to look exactly like that in my life or how it shows up in my body, but I like to know that that's out there. And I feel a real calling to put that type of content out there, never as a braggy thing, but as a way for me to show people what's possible, and it's really attainable. It's like if I can do it, you could do it,
Mm-hmm.
because I this was not something I was good at. I am a student. I am learning. I fail more than I get it right, but I feel that that learning curve of being just a complete student and super vulnerable and receiving is really rewarding. So, especially if you get into this season of your life, odds are you're going to be an expert or sort of expert on a lot of things. You're probably in a leadership position in whether it's your family or outside the home. Like you already have this position. To go back and be just like open-handed student is necessary. I don't even think it's a nice to have. I think it's necessary for further growth. So for me, it's the heavy lifting thing. Now I want to say one thing that it might be a little controversial, but I hope to poke you on this one. Maybe you love things like bar. So like bar work, where you use light weights, maybe 3 to 5 pounders, 1 to 3 pounders, those little ones, totally cool. Or a yoga sculpt where you're using lighter weights and much higher reps. I think that's great. And I think that's a great starting point. It starts to build your stamina, your endurance fibers, and it's awesome. I'm not saying don't do it. I am suggesting to be open that there will be a point in your physical fitness journey where you might outgrow that, where you don't feel the benefits of that anymore. And the reason I say that is when I'm doing powerlifting or more just heavier lifting, that's progressive overload. I'm going to keep trying to lift a little bit heavier. And so you can't do that if you have 3 or 5 pound weights. It's a great base and a foundation. You could love it, but keep yourself open that maybe at some point you'll incorporate something heavier. And so the bottom line with that is the things that you currently love to do, awesome. That's not your finish line. For some of you, it's your starting line. But know that in your fitness journey throughout your lifetime, because you're going to do this forever, right? Forever, that you're going to change and do different things. And I feel with the injuries that I've had from my biology and my arthritis, it is the gift of it is that it's helped me, it forced me. If I wanted to move, I had to move in a different way. So I've tried all kinds of things. And I found that I would have never guessed that I would have liked this type of lifting. Would not have guessed it. Didn't have any propensity for it before at all. So just know wherever you're at is not your finish line. Be open to try different things, even though this is the one thing you really like. You like it now. You may not like it later. Just know that. And that's what athletes do. They can change up what they do. And it looks different in different seasons. So all that to say, in my behavior, what's outward facing is that I do this heavy lifting. And I want people to see that in a way that's encouraging. That's it. Not even for comparison, just encouraging. Okay, that's the external. The internal would be in my thoughts, which is that's that murky place that can be, there's a lot happening in there. And sometimes I'm not really nice to myself. Is that anybody else where that language I would not use for somebody else. And when I hear that in my head, I'm like, that's old or that's something. So for somebody who's been in the fitness industry for 30 plus years, I continue to have an unpacked diet culture. I have not been immune to the messages of the media and marketing and even in the industry itself, even if, trying to keep a handle on it, it was pervasive. It continues to be pervasive in certain amounts. So I would be not serving myself to the highest level if I just let it lay dormant. So in my thoughts, what I'm trying to do is give myself some grace. I didn't know what I didn't know. We know more now. And it points me in the direction of the great poet and activist Maya Angelou. Like, think about it. I love this quote. She says, you do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, you do better. And I love that, right, Claire? We've talked about this in the it works in so many situations, but for my internal dialogue, if I know better now, I know more, I know different, I know another way to go around it, I know other ways to that make more sense. And in that case, then I can let some of the other messages sunset. And when I took a look at that quote a little bit further, the source that I had been looking at just said, hey, this is a quote that is best representing these three qualities. And we thought you would love this as well, being a joyful rebel, is that particular quote about knowing better and then doing better, it really shows that it's a philosophy of growth. Okay, that works for me. Philosophy of growth, raise your hand if that's something that you're interested in. It's also a philosophy of learning. Yep, lifelong learners, where are you? Are you in there where you're just I just want to keep learning and growing and figuring it out? And lastly, it also shows that you're interested in continuous improvement. And I'm like, oh, heck yeah. Okay, so all those three things, which I wouldn't have exactly equated that quote with all those three things in that way, I thought that worked really well. So again, I can't be mad at myself for not knowing what I didn't know.
Mhm.
So I'm going to give myself some grace. So usually for me, it just takes a few moments. Here's the hack of that or the behavior. I'll be like, just take a second, take a deep breath, let it go. Let my shoulders drop away from my ears a little bit. And sometimes I just smile because I'm like, she didn't know. She didn't know. So I'm going to give her some grace and then I'm going to go on with my day. I'm not going to ruminate. I'm just going to be aware. So, right, Claire, once we turn the awareness light on, magic happens.
Chicking.
And then it happens. Okay, so we got it what it looks like in behavior. We got it what it looks like internally. I've got one more. I thought this was an important one is how does it show up in relationships? Which it can be external, but I think it's a combo of what's happening internally and externally. And where I landed was I am doing, keeping top of mind for how I want to be with the people in my life is I want to fix their crowns without telling them that it was crooked.
Mm.
That's where I landed on that, whether it's giving feedback or having a conversation. And there's a couple ways that I want to keep that top of mind or how it comes out of my mouth, from my heart out of my mouth. And one of them is if somebody says something or it catches me in a certain way, instead of just getting into it, again, I can be a rebel without being aggressive. There's lots of different ways to go counter culture on that. And for me, the first one is I just ask more questions. Tell me more about that. Like, what do you mean? Give me more context. I need more. So then they get to talk and process and fill in the gaps, and I'm not jumping to a conclusion. So I ask more questions. That's number one. The second one, and I think this is an important phrase. If I ask a question, and I'm looking for clarification, I'll say the phrase, "You didn't say it like this, but." So then it lets them know that I didn't interpret it where it was like this awful thing, but it could be interpreted like that. So that's why I'm asking for extra information. Like you didn't say it like that, but this is how it could be. So that lets them know that I'm with them. That person, like like I'm a fan. I'm with you. You didn't say it like that, but let's get a little bit deeper, and then they get a chance to then, with more precision,
Mm.
explain what they meant on that. So again, it's giving them a chance to define it a little bit further, and that leads me to the last one. Is I really try to operate where everybody gets the benefit of the doubt. Boy, that's a lot easier said than done. So, but I found that if I'm keeping a scorecard, which seems weird, and I'm uh, not even in my heart, but I come out ahead more often than not on that. And the one-offs where I give somebody the benefit of the doubt and they haven't deserved it. I don't know any better phrase than that, or they have not acted in a way of somebody that I want to let into my life. They are the one-offs. Everybody else, most everybody else, I want to give them the benefit of the doubt. And I find I get that in return. So I have appreciated that seasons change, but I also want to make sure that if I'm a joyful rebel, it's through and through. It's what outward facing, what people can see, even people that don't know me very well. It's the thoughts to myself, which might even be the most important, but it's
Mhm.
also how I deal in relationships and set an example in a way that I really hope reflects the kindness that I want to put out in the world. I think that's it. What do you think about that, Claire? Anything of any of that landing?
Ooh, uh, when we first got on this topic, I was kind of thinking one way about it. And then, as you were describing your thought process on it, it it felt like a lot more. So if you're listening, I hope that you're also asking yourself here, how am I exhibiting some of these joyful, rebel qualities, traits, ways of being? And I love how you reminded everyone, Mom, of what a joyful rebel is because it's familiar to us, right? So sometimes we forget to celebrate it, which I think is a phrase that I might have stolen from you. But joyful rebels going against the norm. And it's funny because just this morning I was wearing my Joyful Rebels tank top, which I love, and my daughter looked at it and she had read a book where, the rebels are portrayed as like some bad guys. And so she goes, so rebels, you're breaking rules, like you're the bad guys. And I kind of, sometimes rebels can be used in that context, but what we're doing is we're just going against the norms, maybe some social rules.
Mm-hmm.
And she was kind of looking at me like, okay. And the example that just came straight to my mind, which is reminding me what some of the things you were talking about, Mom, is I said, like, for example, we're just getting into short season again here. So, I got to wear pants for like what, 2 months here in Louisiana, and now it's already in the 90s again. And I don't always feel super comfortable putting on the shorts again after after wearing comfortable pants for a while. And I just tried to be extremely open. This is my daughter's 10 years old. She's starting to, feel just the pressures of being a girl in society. And I said, like, I'm a rebel because I might not look exactly like people on TV. I might be feeling certain ways about how I look, but I'm going to love myself. I'm going to choose to say, no, this is what's comfortable. I'm going to wear the shorts. I'm not going to be uncomfortable and cover my body up just because I have sometimes have that voice in my head that's not being nice. And then the second thing that popped in my head, and so for me, that really felt like an external behavior. I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
wear the clothes that I'm comfortable in, even when that voice inside that have been conditioned to believe, oh, I don't look a certain way, I shouldn't be wearing this. No, I am going to wear what's comfortable for me because I love myself and I'm going to give myself some grace and compassion, which I heard you saying a lot, Mom. The second behavioral thing for me, external, huh? Being a joyful rebel, it comes back to the drinking as well. And I said that to my daughter too. I was like, well, you see that, I don't drink beer, I don't drink wine, but it's very normal, right? We see that all the time. But I want you to know you don't have to if you don't want to. And
Mm-hmm.
I sometimes think that messaging is missed because it's all over TV shows, even kids shows. Now, as someone who doesn't drink, I see it popping up in kids shows. I'm like, this
Yep.
this is weird. But the mommy wine culture, the idea that it's self-care that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
infiltrating and honestly toxic to a lot of moms and women in general. Um, I like to be that counterculture voice saying,
Mm-hmm.
actually, it's also totally normal if you don't want to have a beer, if you don't want to have some wine. Look at me. I'm happy. I'm loving life. And I'm someone that doesn't do that. And so that's, I'm leading with my behavior, right? My kids see
Yep.
that I'm not, partaking in a beer at the party with the other grown-ups. Like that's fine. But it felt good to be able to say it as well. Like maybe that's something that needs to be said. And so I think externally, those are two examples, and it was just funny that it showed up, this morning of all mornings when my daughter's talking to
Mm-hmm.
me. um that's my external behaviors that I feel like are really me exhibiting joyful rebel. The internal ones, Mom, you said might be the most important, and I'm going to agree with you on that one. And that's really where I was landing when we were reflecting on this question this week. um for me, in thoughts towards myself, it I was viewing it kind of like this dichotomous key. So, for my science nerds out there, if you've ever worked in science and had to identify a living organism, whether it was a plant, an invertebrate, an animal, usually you'll be looking at this organism and you'll get kind of a list, and it will say something like, does this thing have legs? Yes or no? And then it will put you down either the right or left path. And we've probably seen little flow charts like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're answering yes or no, it sends you down one path. So for me, when I'm thinking about my thoughts towards myself, um, I might ask myself first, where am I at, right? It comes down to this awareness and reflection. So I need to really emphasize that again, awareness is coming up. Am I in a time where it's going to be, I have room for growth? Do I have some space for growth? Or maybe I feel stuck and I'm being held back, but you know that feeling when you've been in one spot, but there's something you want to go for. And even the past few episodes, Mom, we've touched on this, that, are you ever really ready? Like, are we going to go for things? I,
Yeah.
I don't want to regret not doing something. And so if I'm in that side of my flow chart, I'm going to call to mind the things that I've learned that have worked for me from doing this Joyful Rebels work,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think that this is a huge point, that once you do take one of these topics, or whether it's a past episode where we had tips on working like things like building confidence or having a hard conversation, like those are always in your brain now.
Yeah.
Like those might be helpful in the future. So if I'm finding myself on this side of the flow chart, then maybe I'm going to give myself some reminders that I know work. Hey, I'm never going to feel ready, right? Is this something that I don't want to regret not doing when I'm older? I'm just going to go for it. Mom, you had said the other week, just figure out the next step, right? I don't
Mm-hmm.
need to know my whole path in front of me, but I'm just going to figure out the one next thing to do. So I take all these phrases that I've learned that have been meaningful for me, and I'm going to use those in that moment. Or maybe I ask myself the question, is this a time for growth? Do I have the space for this? Maybe the answer is no. Maybe there is so much external stuff going on that this is not a time where I'm actively looking to make some major changes. And if that's you, that's okay. Like if it's an honest reflection, because
Hmm.
sometimes, well, let's be clear, it's fear. No, I'm not ready, so I'm not going to do it. But if there is a lot going on, right? If you're moving and starting a new job, maybe you're not going to start the marathon training that week. I mean, maybe you are, right? Everyone's path is different. But if it's really not a time where you're going to be moving forward and making big leaps and bounds, that's okay, right? If you're on that side of the flow chart, the same thing holds true. I'm going to rely on what works for me. And that's where I'm landing recently. And the mantra that's been really helpful for me is this too shall pass.
Mm.
And I say it all the time. I've been teaching to it in all my yoga classes. It works both ways. When something's good, when there's a little moment of, even if it's 20 minutes, the kids weren't fighting. Oh my gosh. Notice it, awareness. I am so thankful for this. Or when my plants bloomed. Oh my gosh, or puts on a new leaf. Oh my gosh, I just love going to you. If you watch on YouTube, you see my jungle back here. If I go see
Yeah.
a new, oh my gosh, a new plant baby, like so happy about it. So I'm taking those moments of good, I'm appreciating them. And then, of course, on the other side of that, if something feels extremely stressful, if it is that transitional moment, this too shall pass. It's temporary. That's hopeful and helpful for me. So, all that in a nutshell, my joyful rebel behaviors and my thoughts are relying on these phrases, the work that I've already done, what I know has been helpful for me. Because again,
Hmm.
if you're doing any of this work, if you've been on this multiple year journey with us, right? Whether this is your first episode listening or you've been listening for years, like all this work you're doing, it counts. And even if you're in a very different season than when you started, that's still okay. Because if you're able to reflect and have some awareness, then that's growth right here, right, Mom? That's that continuous
Hmm.
improvement that you were talking about. And so the last little piece of this trifecta, how I'm being a joyful rebel in my relationships. I was super inspired when you said that Maya Angelou quote, Mom. When you know better, do better. Right? That totally resonates with me. If you're listening, I wonder if that does too. I feel like that's a
Yeah.
real good one. Um, and you mentioned it in your internal dialogue. For me, that works for my relationships because you said giving everyone the benefit of the doubt being easier said than done. 100% agree with you on that one. But that's where I keep landing is that we are all on our unique paths, right? And if this is your day one or day 1000, like we're all in a different area. So it's me choosing to have patience and compassion with other people
Hmm.
just because they don't see it exactly my way. Like, especially in some of my close relationships where I just, no, think the same way as me. But I have to remember, man, we've been putting in a lot of work, Mom, right? Like, we've been
Hmm.
doing the work. If you're listening, if you've been doing the work, right? That's different than, do you remember a time before your awareness light was on? Just living in that kind of ignorance of, just reacting to what's happening
Yep.
to you, right? Like, it's totally different. It's like, opening the door to the technicolor, right? Like once your awareness light is on, there's no going back. And so
Yeah.
when I'm dealing with people that maybe don't have their awareness light on, and you can, plant seeds and there's, positive things you can do, but just remembering that if they know better, I'm going to hope that they're going to do better. And so they're working with what they've got now.
Yep.
They're doing the best that they can. And that, if anything, makes me feel better then because I'm not maybe holding as many grudges. I'm not quick to anger because someone's not seeing something exactly as I am, right? Because that's, unrealistic expectation, anyways. So for me, we're all on this journey together. People are doing the best that they can. That's how I try to view relationships currently in my lens of being this joyful rebel.
Hmm.
Ooh.
Ooh. Well, I don't want it to go much further without acknowledging and celebrating that, if this remains interesting to you, just learning all these different facets of yourself, of ourselves, then it does accumulate. So
Mm,
if you're just starting and you're just kind of like, okay, I'm going to get in the game, or sometimes it's because something happened that makes you want to make a shift and learn, or you're more curious about why you behave the way you do. Sometimes that comes with age. It does. The older you get, I'm finding you ask different questions. You ask bigger ones. And a lot of them come around to knowing yourself better and who you
Mm.
are instead of just going through life because of a breakneck pace. But I love all of this, and it really is the stuff of life. You're asking questions, you're learning more, and the more we can understand, the I'm going to say it boldly as the easier life is. Yes, it doesn't mean that you're devoid of all struggles. That's not it at all. But the lows don't possibly go as low. Not all of them. You get it to hum there in the middle a little bit, and it's fun, and it's not like just always being on a stormy sea. Life does
Mm.
not need to be like that. There's a lot of ways that we can calm it in a way that feels good and is true to us and how we're made and the gifts that we have. And it's just if you're willing to poke around, you'll get some peace here. And that's always been central to the conversations, right, Claire? We're like looking for peace and ease,
Mm.
even though sometimes
Yes.
that means kicking around in the dirt for a while.
Mm.
But just know there is peace and ease on the other side. And I believe it's there for us on the daily. It is. If we stay aware and alert, we find ways to apply the things that we know, whether it's a new behavior or a new thought, or it's something we've had in our toolbox for a while. So let's stay alert enough to just keep connecting the dots and learning a little bit more about ourselves as we are now, not as how we wish we want to be, but just how
Mhm.
are we? And life can be awesome. And sometimes it's going against the norm. And in that way, I'm happily a joyful rebel for sure.
Same here. Happily a joyful rebel. And for you listening, you're a joyful rebel too, because you're joining us. So I encourage you to ask yourself the same question. How are you showing up as a joyful rebel in this season? Thank you so much for listening to us today. I know we had fun. Until next time, Rebels.